The loudest rumor on this topic always opens with a sense of certainty. The modern Philippines appears in the Bible by name. It lands with confidence and spreads like wildfire. Then the pages are checked, the concordances are flipped, and a quiet truth steps forward. The Bible never names the Philippines. No verse says Luzon, Visayas, or Mindanao. No prophet writes the word Philippines, and Paul never sent a letter to Manila. That sober fact does not end the story. It redirects it. Because the biblical writers do something more sweeping than naming a modern country. They draw lines across maps. They speak about coastlands and far islands. They tell of ships riding monsoon winds for years at a time. And they paint a prophetic horizon where people from the ends of the earth sing the name of the God of Israel. On that picture, a 7,641 island archipelago at the sunrise edge of the Pacific stays uncannily in frame. The anchor drops first in the Age of Kings. 1 Kings 9:26 locates a port on the Red Sea at Ezion-Geber near Elath. Solomon builds a fleet there with Hiram of Tyre, and that fleet sails to a place that won a reputation even in antiquity, Ophir. The cargo manifest reads like a merchant's dream. 1 Kings 10:11 speaks of almug wood and precious stones. 1 Kings 10:22 lists gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks, arriving on a 3-year cycle. 2 Chronicles mirrors those details and gives the route again. The list is not a random spread. Red sandalwood, likely from South India. Peacocks native to the Indian subcontinent. Ivory and apes with ranges stretching across East Africa and South Asia. A 3-year turnaround signals a voyage harnessing monsoon seasons and long layovers, not a quick hop down the Red Sea. The Bible's own timeline hints at a round trip across the Indian Ocean world, then the longest commercial highway on Earth. Ancient geographers confirm the road existed. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a 1st-century Greek mariner's guide, describes trade moving from Roman Egypt to Arabia to India, and even points to lands beyond the Ganges. By the 2nd century, Claudius Ptolemy writes about the Golden Chersonese, the Malay Peninsula, and 2 shimmering destinations named Chryse and Argyre, islands of gold and silver. Whether Ptolemy meant Sumatra, Borneo, or places farther northeast, the language he uses sounds like the verses about Ophir. Gold, silver, forests of rare timber, and exotic fauna fill the sails and ships' holds that return to western ports. The road is not theoretical. It is mapped and monetized, and it reaches deep into island Southeast Asia. The easy leap would be to stamp Ophir on the Philippines and declare the argument closed. Responsible study refuses that shortcut. There are multiple serious candidates for Ophir. South Arabia, especially around Yemen and Oman, fits the Joktanite geography in Genesis 10. East Africa's Sofala coast appears in medieval sources and has long been proposed. Western India's ancient port of Sopara, called Sopara in Sanskrit and known to Greeks and Romans, bears a phonetic echo and a shipping legacy. Island Southeast Asia glitters like 1,000 lanterns in this debate. Because of its gold and its place on the monsoon superhighway, the Philippines keeps company in that last cluster, not alone, and the case for it lives in a constellation of clues, not a single neon arrow. Notice how the 3-year cycle in 1 Kings starts to make practical sense. A fleet leaves Ezion-Geber in late spring, rides the northeast monsoon down the Red Sea and out into the Indian Ocean, winters in a safe port in Arabia or India, then catches the southwest monsoon toward ports farther east, possibly visiting multiple harbors before the winds turn again. A round trip on that schedule can easily run over 2 years once the winds, repairs, and loading times are counted, and in practice it becomes 3. Now place cargo on that deck. Red sandalwood, prized for instruments and temple crafts. Peacocks, impossible to mistake, and mentioned by name in the Hebrew text as Tukiam. a term many linguists tie to a Dravidian loanword from Tamil. Ivory and apes, documented across East Africa and South Asia. Gold, the crown of the list, mined in many locations, including Arabia, East Africa, India, and island Southeast Asia. Nothing on the manifest argues against a Far Eastern terminus. Much of it encourages the thought. Archaeology in the Philippines injects hard data into the conversation. The Surigao treasure, a hoard of stunning pre-colonial gold jewelry and ritual objects found in Mindanao, dates mostly to the 10th to 13th centuries. The golden tara from Agusan del Sur, 21 carats, discovered in 1917, points to deep gold-working traditions and cross-cultural influences from India and Southeast Asia. The Balangay boats excavated in Butuan, with carbon dates spanning roughly the 4th to the 13th centuries, prove that large plank-built boats sailed Philippine waters long before Europeans arrived. Those finds are late compared to Solomon's reign, around 979-30 BCE, and that matters for precision, but they confirm a much older seafaring culture and a gold economy, not a sudden Spanish-era development. Chinese Song dynasty records mention Ma'i, a trading polity usually identified with Mindoro or nearby areas as early as 971 CE. Zhao Rugua's 1225 manual, Zhu Fan Ji, lists trade with Luzon and neighbors. The documentary chain grows denser in the late first millennium, but the direction of travel reaches back into the time when the Indian Ocean was already an intercontinental highway. The island of gold motif persists in Greek and Roman geography. Chrysos, the Golden Island, sits just beyond the Golden Chersonese in Ptolemy's geography. Other authors speak of island kingdoms rich in gold and aromatics. Scholars spar about exact coordinates, since ancient latitude and longitude can drift on the page, but the image is clear enough. The Far East, beyond India, hides islands that glitter with gold. The combination of gold wealth, a monsoon-timed trading loop, and exotic fauna read in tandem with the biblical cargo list keeps the Philippines in the conversation, especially in light of pre-colonial gold and its location inside that maritime zone. The prophetic layers step into frame next. Isaiah's scrolls sing about coastlands and far islands. Isaiah 42 calls for praise to the Lord from the ends of the earth, from the sea, and all that fills it, from the coastlands and their inhabitants. Isaiah 24 echoes it, calling for the God of Israel to be glorified in the east, and to be praised in the coastlands of the sea. Isaiah 60 envisions nations and remote coastlands waiting for the Lord's light, and it names the ships of Tarshish bringing sons from far away with silver and gold. The Hebrew terms matter here. Iyim, coastlands or islands. Ketse ha'aretz, the ends of the earth. Mizrach, the place of sunrise. These words are not precise labels for a single archipelago, yet they draw a global reach that includes archipelagos by definition. The Philippines is a literal auditorium of coastlands, thousands of inhabited and uninhabited islands, communities living from and on the sea, villages where the first light of each day rises over the Pacific, and the name of the God of Israel is sung in churches on Sunday morning. The prophecy does not pin a flag on a map, and yet the Philippines lives comfortably inside its imagery. The other myth requires disarming with precision. The letter to the Philippians is not a letter to the Philippines. Philippi was a city in eastern Macedonia, named after Philip II of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great. Paul planted a church there during his second missionary journey in the 1st century, and wrote the letter around the early 60s CE, likely from prison. The modern name Philippines was given by the Spanish explorer Ruy López de Villalobos in 110543 in honor of Prince Philip, later Philip II of Spain. The names share a root in the Greek name Philippos, lover of horses, but the New Testament city and the Southeast Asian archipelago stand worlds and centuries apart. Saying otherwise erodes credibility, and this content protects credibility like treasure. because the biblical narrative is compelling enough without bending it. Now the spotlight returns to ships, because those vessels carry prophetic shadow and historical steel. Tarshish appears in Scripture with a double life. On the one hand, a place, likely in the western Mediterranean, often identified with Tartessos in southern Spain. On the other hand, a class of ships, long-range, ocean-capable merchantmen, such that a ship of Tarshish means a vessel built for serious distance. Isaiah 69 envisions the ships of Tarshish coming first to bring sons from afar, their silver and gold with them, to the name of the Lord. That verse lived under the lamplight of Jewish exiles in the 6th century BCE, and has never stopped echoing for communities returning to their land. Modern history saw an island nation at the far edge of Asia step into that image in a way that felt small at the time and looks weighty today. Manila in 1939 and 1940 saw ships arrive from Shanghai and Europe carrying Jewish refugees who had run out of safe harbors. President Manuel Quinquagésimo Quezon, the Philippine Commonwealth leader, working with U.S. High Commissioner Paul V. McNutt and with the Frieder brothers, Jewish businessmen based in Manila, opened an escape hatch. The plan envisioned as many as 10,000 refugees. Between the summer of 1939 and the spring of 1941, about 1,300 arrived. They became known as the Madaleners. The war choked off the corridor, but the door had opened, and lives were preserved. In 2009, the city of Rishon LeZion in Israel unveiled the Open Doors Monument, honoring the Philippines for that rescue. A small archipelago had carried sons of Israel on ships to safety when most nations closed their gates. That decision reads like a human act of compassion, and it also hums with the wavelength of Isaiah, nations bringing exiles from afar, silver and gold in tow, even if the gold took the form of livelihoods and a future. The Philippines already understood ships as destiny by then. From 1,565 to 1,815, the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade stitched Asia to the Americas. 2 to 3 galleons per year rode the Pacific, westward on the trade winds and eastward on the Kuroshio and the North Pacific Gyre, hauling Chinese silks and porcelain, Southeast Asian spices and Philippine goods to Mexico, and loading Mexican silver for the return voyage. That river of silver became a monetary backbone in China and Southeast Asia for centuries. A prophetic line might notice how Isaiah 60 conflates ships, coastlands, and the flow of silver and gold toward a focal point of worship. The galleons did not sail to Jerusalem, and prophecy does not need that literalism to ring true. What matters is that an island nation grew up as a keeper of transoceanic gates, passing wealth and people between hemispheres, writing routes that sounded ancient in their logic, if modern in their reach. The older layer under those galleons is Austronesian genius. Long before Europeans called the Pacific by name, islanders built vessels that seemed impossible for outsiders to imagine. Outrigger canoes with incredible stability, lashed lug plank boats with flexible hulls, and lateen and crab claw sails that bite into the wind with electric efficiency. Austronesian voyagers crossed thousands of kilometers of open ocean, using stars, swells, seabird flights, and cloud shapes to navigate. Genetic and linguistic data place their expansion across the Pacific between roughly 1,500 and 500 BCE. With islands settled in arcs that defy modern navigation textbooks when written in ignorance of traditional knowledge. Those same maritime skills trained generations in island Southeast Asia, including the Philippines, to treat sea lanes as roads, not walls. The Indian Ocean cinnamon route that brought Southeast Asian spices to the Levant by the 2nd millennium BCE most likely involved Austronesian sailors trading through nodes in Sumatra and beyond. A fleet leaving Ezion-Geber in 950 BCE could find goods from far eastern islands waiting in an Indian port, and sometimes goods and people who originated farther east could find themselves on board as well. Genealogies sit in the background as a quiet guide. Genesis 10 lists the descendants of Joktan, including Sheba, Havilah, and Ophir, and says their dwellings stretched from Mesha toward Sephar, the mountain of the east. Many scholars place Sephar near the Dhofar region of Oman, or in Yemen, which would root the Joktanite clans in southern Arabia. That fact does not constrain trade routes to Arabia alone. It roots the clans that gave their names to places, or people circulating in a trade system that fed on Arabia and radiated beyond it. If Opha began as a Joktanite eponym in Arabia, the name could travel, expanding to a wider region in sailor slang, exactly the way mariners borrow place names and spread them across maps. That habit explains why classical sources sometimes stretch names thin across coasts and islands that share a commodity rather than a king. Spanish chroniclers sometimes adopted biblical poetry for their new island sphere. 17th and 18th century writers occasionally referred to the Philippines as Ophir in homilies and chronicles, not as a precise historical identification but as a flourish connected to gold. The line between rhetorical christening and literal certainty often blurred in early modern texts. That habit fed later nationalist and popular movements that sought a direct match. A reminder of method keeps the compass steady. Biblical Ophir is a debated geonym with solid cases in Arabia, India, East Africa, and possibly farther east. The Philippines belongs to that fourth quadrant of might be, and its credentials include gold, location on monsoon routes, and the Isles of the Sea tapestry of prophecy. That combination keeps interest alive without rushing to a verdict. Pop culture loves a shortcut, so it often reaches for a different kind of hook. Movements in the 20th century in the Philippines drew lines from Isaiah 43 or Isaiah 46 to their own identities or founding moments. Isaiah 46:11 speaks of a bird of prey from the east and a man of counsel from a far country, a text that historically addresses Cyrus of Persia and the return from exile in the 6th century BCE. The power in that verse, like many others, lives in its original setting, and drawing it forward to modern times should honor that setting first. The same caution applies to Isaiah 43, where God promises to regather his people from east and west, and to bring sons and daughters from the ends of the earth. Historically, that promise speaks of Israel. The New Testament lenses, especially Luke Acts, widen the stage to all nations receiving the light promised to Israel, which produces a broad and beautiful frame. The Philippines rises inside that wide angle honestly, through what it actually did in the modern era, and by the way it carries the gospel across seas today. The musical score swells when the Bible's coastlands verses are read alongside Manila Bay at dawn. Malachi 1:11 declares that from the rising of the sun to its setting, the name of the Lord will be great among the nations. Psalm 113 repeats that image. Isaiah 42 summons a new song for those who go down to the sea and all that is in it. The Philippines stands as the largest Christian majority nation in Asia, home to tens of millions of worshipers who sing these words weekly. That fact is not a proof text. It is a living echo. The reality of praise rising from islands at sunrise fits seamlessly with the prophetic expectation that nations and coastlands would one day join in Israel's song. The road to that reality traveled through a bruising colonial century and a whirlwind of change. Ferdinand Magellan's crew reached the archipelago in 1521 and planted the first flag for Spain. The Spanish crown and Catholic orders established a colonial church over the next decades. Miguel Lopez de Legazpi founded Manila in 1571. The colonial story carries weight and complexity in the Philippines, with martyrdoms, revolts, syncretisms, and deep transformations. Alongside that, the archipelago became a staging ground for missionaries into China, Japan, and the Pacific, and a bridge for the Bible into local languages. Protestant missions arrived after 1898. The Philippine Bible Society and other publishers produced translations in Tagalog, Cebuano, Ilocano, and dozens of other languages through the 20th century. The result is a modern landscape in which villages along coastlines the prophets would have recognized as Eyam now carry Bibles in their own tongues and tell Israel's story as their own. Global flows wrap themselves around this picture. Over 10 million Filipinos live and work outside the Philippines today. Overseas Filipino workers serve in the Middle East, Europe, North America, and Asia. In Israel, Filipino caregivers and workers gather in house churches and community centers, lifting the name of the God of Israel in Hebrew cities and villages. A modern footnote blazes with prophetic color. The nations are in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, not as conquerors but as servants and friends, singing praise to Israel's God. The relationship runs both directions. In the late 1940s, the Philippines voted yes on UN General Assembly Resolution 181. On November 29, 1947, the plan to partition the British Mandate and create a Jewish and an Arab state, the Philippines stood nearly alone among Asian countries in supporting the measure. Recognition of the new state of Israel followed in 1948, and diplomatic relations started formally in 1957. Those dates read like footnotes in many histories. In the Bible's language of nations and coastlands, they read like the choreography of prophecy, playing out in ordinary time. Everything still converges on those heavy cargoes in the age of Solomon. The commodities list does not specify the Philippines, and it does not need to. It reconstructs a route and a commercial ecosystem that one can stand inside today. Cinnamon from Indonesia is attested in Egyptian contexts by the 2nd millennium BCE, likely moving through South Arabian and Indian brokers. Indian peacocks and sandalwood fit the manifest exactly. Ivory and apes underline the African and Asian halves of the circuit. The 3-year turnaround matches monsoon realities. The Philippines sits at the northeastern corner of this oceanic web, with abundant pre-colonial gold and a later documentary record brimming with exports and maritime savvy. The idea that some goods in Solomon's palace began in mines or markets in Luzon or Mindanao can sit on the table as a serious hypothesis, especially when routed through Indian entrepôts. Direct voyages by Phoenicians to the Philippine archipelago in the 10th century BCE cannot be proven. But neither do they need to be, in order to include Philippine wealth within reach of the Ezion-Geber fleet. Linguistic threads add texture. The Hebrew tukium for peacocks finds a strong match in Tamil toke or similar forms. Almug or algoon wood appears to many to be red sandalwood, Pterocarpus santalinus, native to the Deccan Plateau and Andhra region of India. Tarshish itself is a riddle and a symbol. Hiram of Tyre and the Phoenician world dominated Mediterranean trade. Ezion-Geber projects those skills into the Red Sea. The phrase ships of Tarshish in the prophets often seems to mean large-distance merchant ships rather than vessels restricted to Spain. When the prophets imagine those ships bringing exiles home and carrying wealth to Zion, they are baptizing a class of vessels, not pinning down a single harbor. Manila's galleons, in that light, were a family resemblance to what the prophets saw on the horizon, and there is more to islands in the prophets than ships. Isaiah 49 pictures nations, bringing Israel's sons and daughters, kings their foster fathers, and queens their nursing mothers. In 1938, Quaison invited meetings on his farm in Marikina to plan the rescue. He built cottages and a small golf course to support tuberculosis care for refugees. He proposed allocating land in Mindanao for Jewish settlement. Not all phases came to fruition, but the spirit of the plan speaks with the language of Isaiah. The Philippines did not merely accept refugees as paper entries. The leaders prepared to fold them into the life of the nation. That posture of shelter and honor is exactly the role Isaiah imagines for distant nations in Israel's restoration. Reading history this way pleads for humility. It honors the ancient text and the modern acts without exaggeration. The coastlands motif runs deep enough to capture other layers. Zephaniah 2 contains oracles against the Philistine coast and beyond. reminding listeners that the sea borders of Israel matter. Jeremiah 31 orders announcements to the coastlands far away to proclaim the regathering of Israel. The Greek Septuagint often translates Ilium with Nesoi, islands, which planted the imagery in Hellenistic consciousness. By the New Testament era, the world is map literate enough that Luke can write of the ends of the earth, and the phrase will carry both poetry and geography. Acts 1:8 sends the church from Jerusalem to Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Centuries later, the gospel arrived in a literal ends of the earth archipelago. The reach from Jerusalem to Manila on a globe measures close to half the world's circumference. The phrase reads like metaphor and map at the same time. Curiosity circles back over and over to the name Ophir, because it holds the scent of gold. Filipino gold traditions stand in bright relief. Ancient place names associated with gold include Butuan, with its proximity to the weaponized root Bulawan for gold in many Visayan languages. 1981 discovery of over 4,000 pieces in Surigao, including sacred regalia, stunned the museum world. The designs mix local artistry with Indic motifs, showing precisely the kind of trade network hinted at by Ptolemy's golden Chersonesus. The Laguna copperplate inscription, dated 900 CE, contains Old Malay, Sanskrit, Old Javanese, and Old Tagalog elements, and speaks of debts and rights across polities. It proves that, by that date, a sophisticated, multilingual, maritime trading world existed, with gold as its grease. The documentary line supports an earlier tradition of gold work and trade reaching back beyond our current inscriptions. When the Bible speaks of places overflowing with gold and seaborne connections as old as Solomon, the Philippine archipelago qualifies as a reasonable participant in that world, even when direct links to the 10th century BCE remain unproven. The temptation to slam the gavel on the case often comes from insecurity rather than faith. The Bible's power does not weaken because a modern nation is not named directly. The Bible's reach becomes more awe-inspiring when its geography is both definite and open. When the prophets see coastlands and islands joining a song that will take millennia to harmonize, the Philippines enters this music on multiple notes. It likely provided goods to the monsoon-fed exchange network that brought wealth to Solomon's courts, at least indirectly. It is literally a grandstand of coastlands that now worship Israel's God in their own languages at the place of sunrise. It acted in the 20th century as a small but brilliant defender and carrier of Israel's sons in crisis. It used its role as a seagate in the age of galleons to build a culture that treats the ocean as its home and the ends of the earth as its business. It sent a vote across oceans to favor Israel's rebirth, and sent workers and worshippers across seas to the cities of Israel, singing the same psalms Israel wrote. One more stone on the trail deserves inspection. The verse in Isaiah 49:12 mentions those from Sinim in some translations. The Hebrew term Sinim appears rarely, and scholars debate where it points. Some propose the region of Syene in southern Egypt. Others suggest a link to the Sinites in Phoenicia. Modern readers sometimes hear China in the word and draw a line eastward. The debate remains unresolved in academic circles. The point that survives every reading is simple and powerful. Isaiah foresees movement from the north, from the west, and from some remote region not usually considered, all converging on Zion. That mental map includes a massive east-of-east domain populated by islands. The Philippines sits beneath that compass point like a dock. The story carries a tenderness often missed in hot takes. Filipinos rescued Jewish families on the eve of war. Filipinos pray in Hebrew cities today. Filipinos still carry Marian processions down island roads and sing hallelujahs in evangelical services on Sunday nights, lifting the God of Israel with a fervor that the prophets longed to see. Filipinos carve boats, build ships, crew tankers, and navigate the maritime arteries of a planet that stays tuned to monsoon and trade wind rhythms older than the pyramids. Every one of those details, anchored in names and dates and places, echoes a line in a scroll and a whisper in a psalm. The Bible casts the ends of the earth and the islands of the sea as supporting actors in a story centered on Israel and the Messiah. The Philippines smiles inside that role and turns it into a vocation. The next time a map of the ancient world appears on a screen, the invitation holds strong. Trace the Red Sea down to Ezion-Geber. Follow the route around Arabia to the ports of the Deccan. Imagine cinnamon and copal from far islands stacked in warehouses that smell like the forest floor after rain. Notice a crate of carved red sandalwood, a string of trade passing through India that began in an island where Balangay hauled logs in a river mouth shaded by nipa. Picture a chest of gold with hammered filigree that looks suspiciously like the art in a Surigao pendant 1,000 years later. Hear a dealer say tukium in a nasal tone that came to him from a Tamil merchant. Then flip the map forward. Draw the Kuroshio current bending to Acapulco. See silver coins stamped with pillars of Hercules, stacked in a hold guarded by Spanish gunners and Filipino sailors. Walk forward again to 1939 and watch a Jewish mother step onto a Manila pier in a linen dress with tears of relief. Walk into a Tel Aviv apartment where Tagalog worship songs roll through an open window onto a Mediterranean street. Every frame leaves the same impression. The route is long, but the story is one. The argument does not end with certainty about Ophir's exact coordinates, and it does not need to. The Philippines' role emerges from overlaps. It sits at the convergence of an ancient exchange system that fits the Bible's maritime puzzle. It is an archipelago that embodies the coastlands the prophets call to sing. It has, in living memory, carried sons and daughters of Israel to safety on ships when many did nothing. It continues to send worshippers to the land of Israel, who carry the name of the God of Israel in their mouths and hearts. On paper, that sounds like an elegant theory. In the streets of Manila and the harbors of ancient Ezion-Geber, it feels like a story written with waves and wind, with gold dust and psalms, with vote tallies and open doors. The Bible does not have to print the letters P-H-I-L-I-P-P-I-N-E-S on a page to be pointing directly at those islands when it speaks of the ends of the earth and the coastlands waiting for the light. A final detail amplifies the tone. The Hebrew Bible often uses the phrase "the ends of the earth" as a way to push listeners' imaginations past the horizon. The New Testament takes that phrase literally and missionally. It dispatches messengers to islands as well as continents. In particular, Acts 13 links the light to the nation's language with the proclamation of the Messiah to Gentiles. That is where the Filipinos stepped aboard. By the time the world reached the 21st century, Filipinos had planted churches across the Gulf, North America, Europe, and East Asia. They had built a linguistic mosaic of scripture in their own languages. They had adopted a life of travel and service that made them a living parable of the Great Commission to the limits of the map. Everything remains sober and rooted. No proof texts distorted. No cheap equivalences. No imaginary conversations with Solomon on Mindoro. Just a careful reading of routes and cargoes, profits and coastlines, votes and visas. From that precision, a powerful picture emerges. The Philippines, unnamed but unmistakably present, belongs to the world the Bible describes and to the future the prophets saw. The islands at sunrise did not stay silent. They learned the song of Zion. They hummed it on docks where refugees stepped ashore. They carried it on galleons and jetliners. They lifted it in chapels from Jolo to Ilocos, and in living rooms from Bat Yam to Haifa. In the long cadence of Scripture, that sound registers as fulfillment in motion.